So yesterday I saw this article that was geared towards COVID-19 and deer hunting, how it positively and negatively affected the sport. And after thinking about it, I really think that I have an example of that. This year for me was very, very lackluster. I saw plenty of deer, a lot of deer, not a lot of the deer that I would normally shoot year after year. And after spending some time thinking about it, that's kind of what I chalked it up as. I actually saw an article come across my phone one morning on how it positively and negatively affected deer hunting. So the question that I had was, how much did COVID affect deer hunting? Did it affect the numbers? Were there more deer killed last year during all the lockdowns and stuff versus this year? And what was the numbers like previous? So this year, at least for the state of Tennessee, I looked all this stuff up and I got some pretty cool results from it. So about a week ago, this article popped up whenever I'm in the midst of trying to figure out why I had such a hard deer season. The article was on the Deer and Deer Hunting website. They have a magazine and stuff, if you guys have maybe ever seen them in a store, but they have a cool website with a bunch of different articles and stuff on deer hunting, keeping deer, kind of what deer do, that kind of a thing. And they had some really cool points on this. Number one, non-hunters become hunters. Turns out that at least in the state of Tennessee, we had about an extra 1 million licenses sold, which doesn't seem like a lot, but whenever you think about the population density and the amount of hunters that we already had, that's quite a bit. That's a pretty big number. So non-hunters became hunters in 2020/2021, but mostly in 2020 during all the lockdowns and stuff. That was a very, very big year for license sales and stuff, not only locally or residentially, but non-residentially. It says somewhere farther on down in this article, once again I'll have it linked down in the description, you can read it for yourself, but most states either had a decrease in non-resident hunters, like out-of-state hunters, or they had increased, but it was a lower increase versus other years. There was like a 1.9% decrease or increase, but it was still only a 1.9% increase from previous years in Pennsylvania. So it still increased, but it didn't go up by such a high margin as previous years had. Say that previous year had like a 4% or a 5%. This year it was only, or 2020 was only a 1.9%. So a lot more in-state licenses sold, probably per state. In fact, I know it's per state. Everybody was kind of locked up and hunting season was still open. I know the Tennessee's DNR, the TWRA, they had a bunch of stuff, a bunch of memes posted about how places might be closed down, but deer hunting and outdoor activities are still open around here. Another thing that happened was in this article, they found out that a lot of people that hadn't bought licenses for a few years, hadn't been hunting in a few years, bought licenses and got back out in the woods. So that's pretty interesting. I don't believe it was mentioned what states those were that they kind of figured that out at, but they said that 67,000 licensed buyers in the study were reactivated. So 67,000 plus or minus some people went and bought licenses after not buying them for a few years previous. Another thing that it talks about in this article, and you guys might have noticed this if you went to go process any of your deer or turkeys or whatever, that the processors were slammed. It was hard to get your meat back in a timely manner. Some places, even this year around me, weren't taking deer. So if you shot a deer, you had to process it yourself, or it just wouldn't be processed at all because they couldn't take any more meat in. I also find it interesting that in the state of Tennessee we have the chronic wasting disease, CWD, and it says something about how they moved a lot of their agents and whatnot for the state to like localized small areas, yet they still got a ton of samples in to test for it. I don't exactly know. I know that place down the street from me, they have a place where you can get your own sample, but it's talking about how they had officers and stuff in place to get them themselves. That doesn't make a lot of sense to me. CWD must go on, I guess, and whatever. It seems like one of the biggest things that this article talks about is how marketing and stuff plays a role in keeping hunters, and how years previously it isn't the fact that we the people aren't showing new hunters how to hunt, it's the fact that they're not marketing products and whatnot towards hunting, which I don't understand that at all. The biggest takeaway that they're giving from this is saying that, well, at least in my eyes, that the marketing is what made the deer hunting, the the amount of hunters go up, and not so much COVID. But it's pretty, self-explanatory that there's a million extra hunters, and it didn't happen from the marketing, because nothing with the marketing changed. So I think that's kind of strange that they gear that away from the pandemic thing and geared it towards marketing companies. That doesn't add up to, that doesn't make sense to me. But I want to look past that now and think about what else besides what that article says, what proved that there were more deer hunters. And upon looking back through the records this year, you can look back on the TWRA website, how many deer were harvested each year. So in 2019, I believe that there was, and let me double check this real quick, from the 2019 season to the 2020 deer season in the state of Tennessee, there were 133,875 deer harvests reported to the state. That was right before the pandemic. If we look back at the time frame of reported harvests from September of 2020 to January of 2020, it shows that during the pandemic, during all the lockdowns and all that happened during deer season, there were 158,741 deer killed. That's an extra 20-something thousand over the year previous. So that's a little bit of an uprise, not a ton, but let's take a look and see what this year just ended. We're going into 2022 now. Our deer season ended one day ago. This past season, starting in September, going to now January of 2022, it shows that 131,419 deer have been killed in the state of Tennessee and reported since this past September. So that's quite a few less than what was killed last year, and a little bit less than what was killed the year before. It wasn't an outstanding year for deer numbers as far as harvesting and whatnot goes. But one thing that I did notice last year versus this year was the amount of people hunting public land. Anywhere that I went, anywhere in the closest wildlife management areas was always packed, whether it was the opening day of a season, bow, archery, rifle, whatever. It seemed like every trail, every place that looked good on a map to me had people all over it. It had four-wheelers all over it. There were a ton of people everywhere. This year it wasn't nearly as bad. There were still quite a few people out, but compared to the 2019 season, before COVID ever became a thing, there was barely anybody hunting these public lands. After COVID happened, you could definitely tell that there were a lot more people hunting, there was a lot more pressure, and there was a lot less deer on public lands. Now, to go find the actual deer that I did see all year long, I had to go to these little pieces of public land that nobody ever looked at or hunted private land. A lot of the stuff that was public, nobody ever hunted because it was so small. There wasn't really a big need, not a lot of room for people to go explore it. And that's where I saw most of my deer. That's where I killed 2 deer that ended up having CWD. And the only other deer, the main one I wanted to shoot, the main buck that I wanted to shoot this year, was on private land. And we didn't recover him. He's still actually up and alive. But it seems like, especially towards like land between the lakes here in Tennessee, Natchez Trace, all them, they were filled with people last year. Not so much this year. Late season and land between the lakes last year didn't have anybody on it. Now, there were quite a few people still hunting this year on public land, but it wasn't nearly as bad. But there also just wasn't nearly as many, there wasn't as much sign. Like, there wasn't as many deer, or as many deer sightings. You didn't see as many deer dead on the roads, on the interstate, that kind of stuff. You could definitely tell that there was a shift, and whether that had to do with just luck or the fact that there just people killed more deer per county and whatnot. Because some counties in Tennessee, specifically in West Tennessee, did really good this year. They had good harvest rates, and others, some of the best ones in the county or in the state, didn't have as many deer, or as many deer harvested. So that makes things change a lot. I know that on my private ground where I had cameras posted at, we went from having 40 to 50 different deer every year, and now that's down to I believe 10 or 9 deer that all the time come around. And neighboring people saying the same, even though they didn't seem to kill as many deer last year or this year. It seemed like the population was really far down. Now, I'm not going to blame that on the whole CWD thing, because I don't know enough about it to know that, but I do know that there were a lot more people out this year or last year hunting than there were this year, and I think that really, really shows. I don't know what the license sales were like this year. I don't know if there were just as many people hunting or not, but it definitely last year definitely had an impact on this year's hunting. So I don't know what that means for your state. If you're hunting in Tennessee, they're wanting us to kill a lot of deer anyway because of CWD and have them tested. That's probably not going to be a good thing, but that's what they want done. So it's going to happen either way. But I know for me this year, in a lot of places, it was harder to find deer where there's been deer years previous. Even the whole public land, it seems like the deer kind of shifted more to private land. Even on the stuff that was public, like the big parks and whatnot that you could hunt, just not as many deer. Same thing with turkey season. We had the exact same thing happen last spring with turkey season, because last spring was whenever it all really started. There were people everywhere turkey hunting, and this year it seemed like there was a lot of turkeys around for 2021, but there was also a lot of people out hunting them for the first like week or two, and after that it was dead. But previous to that, there was a lot of people hunting in 2021, or 2020, not 2021. Not nearly as many people this year. So there's some statistics. I know that we had, what was it, 20 something thousand more deer killed. I'm not sure if that correlates or if it was just a good year for deer hunting, but either way, interesting little facts. Take it for what you will. I'll see you guys next time.